Sometimes the most unexpected hearts find you when you're not even looking. His sister first, then his aunt. I hadn't seen my best friend's family in over a year. When he called, saying his mother wasn't well and that he'd be staying at their old house for a while, I offered to visit. It felt like something simple. Two friends catching up, a few quiet days away from the city. But the moment I stepped through that wooden gate, I realized this visit wouldn't be ordinary. The house stood surrounded by tall neem trees, their leaves whispering in the breeze. The air smelled faintly of rain-soaked earth and old memories. I carried my bag up the creaking stairs to the guest room, the same one I'd stayed in years ago, back when everything still felt uncomplicated. As I unpacked, I noticed the way sunlight pooled on the floorboards, soft and golden. I was lost in thought when the door suddenly opened. She froze in the doorway, my friend's sister. I remembered her as a teenager who'd followed us around with endless questions. But now she stood there, graceful yet surprised, her hand still on the knob. "Oh, sorry. I didn't know you were already here," she said, a nervous laugh escaping her lips. Her voice was lighter than I remembered, and her presence filled the room like a breath of warm air. She brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, a small, instinctive gesture, and smiled, unsure if she should step in or walk away. "It's fine," I said quietly, and for a second, our eyes met. That awkward, fleeting kind of silence that holds something unnamed. She left with a soft apology, the scent of her shampoo lingering faintly in the air. I turned back to my bag, trying to ignore the quick, strange beat of my heart. But a few seconds later, there was another knock. Softer this time. When I opened the door, it wasn't her. It was his aunt, the woman I remembered from my friend's graduation photos. She looked composed, poised, her movements carrying the kind of calm that comes with age and experience. "I thought you might need these," she said, handing me two freshly folded towels. Her tone was kind, but her eyes, steady and assessing, rested on me for a heartbeat longer than necessary. "Thank you," I replied, and she nodded, stepping inside for just a moment to place them on the chair. The air seemed to shift slightly, carrying the soft fragrance of her perfume, something elegant, almost nostalgic. Her smile was faint but genuine. "It's good you came. He's been missing his friends," she said, turning to leave. And just like that, I was alone again. But the quiet wasn't the same anymore. Two women had crossed that doorway in less than 5 minutes. One young, hesitant, full of light. The other calm, confident, yet carrying a quiet weight behind her gaze. I told myself it meant nothing, just coincidence. But deep down, I knew. The house had its own rhythm, and I had just stepped into it. Dinner that evening was warm and familiar, the kind of comfort only old houses and old memories can offer. The table was long and a little uneven, its wooden surface polished by years of shared meals. My best friend sat across from me, talking animatedly about his work, about how different everything felt since moving back home. I listened, smiled, but my focus kept slipping, caught by glances that didn't quite belong to the conversation. Across the table sat his sister, dressed simply, her hair loosely tied. She was quieter than the rest, listening more than speaking. But every now and then, when laughter filled the room, I caught her watching me, not directly, but through those soft, sidelong glances that hold curiosity more than intent. Whenever our eyes met, she'd look down quickly, a small smile tugging at her lips as if she'd been caught thinking too much. And then there was the aunt, seated diagonally from me, graceful and effortlessly composed. Her shawl was a pale shade of ivory, resting lightly on her shoulders, and her posture carried an ease that felt almost hypnotic. She wasn't loud, but everything she said landed softly, like words meant to linger. At one point, as she passed me the bowl of rice, our hands brushed. Just a fleeting touch, skin against skin, but it was enough to pull my thoughts into unfamiliar territory. There was nothing forward or deliberate in it, yet something about her calm presence made me hyper-aware of every detail. The warmth of her fingers, the faint scent of sandalwood that followed. The sister noticed it too, or maybe I only imagined that she did. Her smile faltered for just a second before she reached for her glass. The aunt didn't seem to notice at all. She continued speaking softly about the jasmine plant blooming again this season, about how she'd been tending to it since her sister, my friend's mother, fell ill. The conversation moved on, laughter returned, but underneath it all was a quiet current, one that didn't belong to anyone's words. When dinner ended, I helped clear the table, partly to be polite and partly to steady my thoughts. The aunt thanked me, her tone gentle, her eyes lingering in a way that felt neither inappropriate nor entirely neutral. The sister walked past, close enough that her shoulder brushed mine, and whispered, "It's good you're here. He's been happier since morning." There was warmth in her voice, genuine affection. Yet as I watched her walk away, I felt a different kind of warmth from the doorway. The aunt, standing there, smiling faintly as if she'd been thinking something she'd never say aloud. That night, I lay awake longer than I should have, replaying tiny, meaningless details. A glance across the table, a hand that stayed just a moment longer, a smile that knew too much. Nothing had happened, not really. But in that quiet house, it already felt like something had begun. The house had fallen silent hours ago. Only the soft ticking of the hallway clock broke through the quiet. I sat by the small desk near the window, half reading a book I couldn't focus on. The night air drifted in, cool, fragrant with jasmine, and the world outside was washed in pale moonlight. I told myself I wasn't waiting for anything, but my thoughts wouldn't settle. Every little sound, a creak in the hallway, the hum of the ceiling fan, pulled at my attention. That's when it came, a soft knock on the door. It was tentative, almost shy. I hesitated, then opened it. Standing there, wrapped in a thin shawl, was his sister. Her hair was loose, her expression uncertain. "Sorry," she whispered. "I couldn't sleep. I thought maybe you couldn't either." Her voice was barely above the whisper of the night breeze. I nodded, stepping aside to let her in. She sat by the window, folding her legs beneath her like she used to as a child, though she wasn't that girl anymore. There was a quiet maturity in her face, something gentle yet searching. We talked softly, about her brother, about how hard it had been caring for their mother, about how sometimes she felt invisible in her own home. I listened, surprised by how much she carried behind her smile. "You were always the calm one," she said at one point, eyes flicking toward me. "Even when you were younger. You never said much, but people always listened." I smiled at that, unsure what to say. The room felt smaller now, not suffocating, just quietly alive. The lamplight painted soft shadows on her face, catching the glint in her eyes each time she looked up. When she laughed, it was delicate and fleeting, the kind that disappears before you can hold on to it. Her hand rested on her knee, and for a moment, as she shifted slightly closer, her fingers brushed mine. It wasn't intentional, at least I don't think it was, but the warmth lingered longer than it should have. "Thank you," she murmured after a pause. "It's easier to breathe when someone actually listens." I nodded again, my throat a little tight. She stood, smiled, a faint, apologetic smile, and moved toward the door. "Good night," she said softly. Her shawl brushed against my hand as she passed, leaving behind a faint scent of rosewater and rain. I stood there, watching her walk down the hall until she turned the corner. The house grew still again. I had just sat back down when there came another knock. Slower this time. Steadier. For a second, I thought maybe she'd forgotten something, but when I opened the door, it wasn't her. It was the aunt. She stood there with a cup of steaming tea, her eyes calm, unreadable, but carrying something the night itself seemed to understand. And for a heartbeat, the silence between us said more than words could. She stood there in the dim hallway light, holding a cup of chamomile tea. The soft steam rose between us like something alive, curling and fading in the air. "I noticed your light was still on," she said quietly. Her voice had that low, steady calm, the kind that could soften even the sharpest silence. I stepped aside instinctively, and she entered. She didn't ask if she could. She didn't need to. Some people carry a kind of quiet authority. Hers came wrapped in grace. The room suddenly felt smaller, more intimate. The faint ticking of the wall clock, the rustle of her shawl as she adjusted it around her shoulders, even the whisper of her breath as she set the cup on the table. Everything seemed amplified. "I couldn't sleep either," she admitted, taking the chair near the window. "It's strange how old houses hold their own memories. You can almost hear them breathing at night." I smiled faintly, surprised by her choice of words. "Maybe that's why I can't read," I said. "Too many stories already in the walls." She laughed softly, a genuine sound, rich but quiet. "You notice things," she said. "Most people your age don't." The comment lingered longer than I expected. There was no judgment in her tone, no attempt at flattery, just observation. It felt like she had looked straight into the way I thought. We talked for a while, about nothing urgent, about books, about how people change, about how caring for others can sometimes make you forget how to care for yourself. Her words carried weight, shaped by experience, but her eyes, they carried warmth. When I finally took the cup from her, our fingers touched. Just for a second. A soft, natural brush, but it landed deeper than it should have. Her skin was warm, and the contact sent an odd calm through me. Not excitement. Something steadier, almost grounding. She noticed it too. Not by reaction, but by stillness. Her gaze held mine for a fraction longer before she looked away, smiling faintly to ease the moment. "I shouldn't keep you up," she said finally, standing slowly. "You need rest. Tomorrow will be long." As she turned toward the door, the lamplight traced the outline of her hair, dark with a few silvery threads that only made her look more dignified. "Good night," I murmured. She paused at the doorway, looking back once. "Good night," she replied softly. Then after a brief pause, "And thank you for listening." Her voice carried something gentle but unspoken. When she left, the air still held her fragrance, a mix of sandalwood, tea, and rain. I sat for a long time, staring at the half-empty cup, feeling the room's silence settle back around me. It wasn't desire exactly, not yet. It was something deeper, quieter. The feeling of being understood without explanation. And as I turned off the lamp, I realized I was no longer sure who had come to comfort whom. The first light of morning slipped through the half-drawn curtains, painting thin gold lines across the floor. I hadn't really slept. The night had been too full of thoughts, too heavy with things that didn't need to be said but refused to be ignored. The faint clatter of dishes drifted in from the kitchen. Somewhere in the courtyard, a bird kept calling, rhythmic and insistent. I sat up, running a hand through my hair, the memory of last night replaying in quiet fragments. Her soft voice, the tea, the stillness between words. When I walked into the kitchen, the air was already alive with the scent of breakfast, butter melting on toast, tea steeping, something frying on the stove. His sister was standing there, tying her hair back with a ribbon, humming faintly. She turned when she saw me and smiled, bright, effortless, as if the world hadn't shifted even slightly in the hours before dawn. "Good morning," she said, her voice light, like it always had been. I smiled back, forcing my tone to match hers. "Morning." She poured me a cup of tea, the same way she used to when we were younger. Too sweet, too milky, but done with care. When our fingers brushed over the cup's handle, it felt innocent, uncalculated. Yet something in me compared the touch to another, steadier, quieter, last night's. "Did you sleep?" she asked, setting the plate of toast on the table. Eventually, I lied. She nodded, sitting across from me, propping her chin on her hand as she talked about her plans. How she wanted to take her mother to the garden later, how her aunt had been helping her through the stress. Her words were casual, but when she mentioned the aunt's name, my pulse shifted. As if summoned by the thought, the aunt appeared in the doorway a moment later. She was dressed in soft blue, hair still slightly damp from the morning wash, a delicate chain glinting against her neck. Her eyes met mine briefly, a simple greeting, polite, neutral, yet it said too much for so little. "Good morning," she said, her tone composed. "You're up early." Her niece smiled. He was probably hungry. I laughed softly, but it came out uneven. The aunt smiled too, a polite curve of lips, nothing more, and began setting the table for the others. But every time she moved near, I caught the faint trace of sandalwood and chamomile, and the room felt smaller. The sister chatted brightly beside her, telling her something funny from the night before, unaware of the quiet thread of tension running beneath it all. I watched them, two women so close, yet worlds apart. One carried youth and brightness, the other, calm and history. Both had touched my life within a span of hours, and I wasn't sure what that said about me. When breakfast ended, the sister went outside to water the plants, humming again. The aunt stayed back, collecting the dishes. As she reached for the teacup near me, our fingers met again. Just a moment. No words. But her eyes lifted to mine, and there it was. That same unspoken question neither of us dared to name. The sunlight caught the edge of her smile as she turned away. And in that quiet kitchen, I felt the weight of something I couldn't call love, yet couldn't ignore anymore. Evening draped the house in a soft amber glow. The day had passed in small fragments. Laughter in the garden, hushed conversations over tea, and long moments where silence seemed to mean more than words ever could. By the time dusk settled, I could feel the distance between what should be said and what was being felt grow dangerously thin. We all sat together in the living room that night. The television played quietly, half forgotten, while my best friend joked with his sister about something from their childhood. The aunt sat by the window, half in shadow, knitting idly, though I noticed her eyes weren't on the yarn. Once or twice, I caught her gaze flicker toward me, calm but aware. Each glance was fleeting, polite, but each one landed with the same soft weight on my chest. When the laughter faded and everyone began drifting off to bed, she stayed behind, pretending to gather the cups. I offered to help. She shook her head lightly but didn't move when I stood beside her. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The silence was thick, not awkward, just delicate. Like the air itself understood it shouldn't break. "I keep finding you awake at the oddest hours," she finally said, her voice soft enough to blend with the sound of crickets outside. "I could say the same about you," I replied. That earned a small smile, the kind that barely reached her lips but lingered in her eyes. Maybe we're both running from the same kind of quiet. Her words settled between us like a confession neither of us had the right to make. I looked toward the terrace door, open just a little, the night breeze moving through it. "Walk with me," I asked before I could think better of it. She hesitated, just for a heartbeat, then nodded. Outside, the air was cool and faintly sweet with jasmine. The stars shimmered above the old courtyard wall, the same one her father had built decades ago. She leaned on the railing, arms folded, her shawl slipping slightly off one shoulder. Without thinking, I reached out and fixed it. A simple gesture, yet one that made her inhale, sharply but quietly. "Thank you," she said. I didn't answer. The moment had its own language. Her hand rested on the railing, fingers brushing mine in that accidental but not way. She didn't pull away. Neither did I. She looked at me then, really looked. "You remind me," she said slowly, "that sometimes the heart doesn't care about timing." Her eyes glistened under the soft terrace light, not with tears, but with restraint. I wanted to say something, anything that would make sense of what was happening, but words would have ruined it. So, I did the only thing that felt right. I reached up, gently tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. She closed her eyes for a moment, a breath caught between calm and ache. When she opened them again, she smiled faintly. "We should go in," she whispered. But neither of us moved. And for that one unspoken moment, under the quiet sky, we both knew. Some silences are meant to be felt, not filled. The morning I was leaving, the sky was overcast, the kind of gray that feels heavy with unspoken goodbyes. The garden shimmered with dew, and the air smelled faintly of wet leaves and tea. I stood by the car, suitcase in hand, pretending to check my phone though my thoughts were far from any screen. Inside, the house was stirring awake. My best friend called out something about visiting again soon. His voice carried the same warmth as always, but it felt distant, like a familiar song fading behind new noise. His sister appeared first. She was still in her night clothes, a light sweater draped over her shoulders. She looked sleepy, gentle, the same soft energy she'd carried from the first day. "I didn't know you were leaving this early," she said, stepping closer. "I have a long drive," I replied, smiling faintly. She nodded, hesitated, then reached into her pocket. "I wrote this last night," she said, holding out a folded note. "Don't open it now. Read it when you stop for a break." Her fingers brushed mine as I took it. Warm, fleeting, like everything about her. "Thank you," I said quietly. "For what?" "For reminding me what kindness sounds like." She smiled at that, though I could see a flicker of sadness in her eyes, the kind that comes when you realize something meaningful won't have another chapter. She turned and walked back toward the house, her hair catching the morning light one last time. And then, from the side porch, the aunt appeared. She carried a small scarf, neatly folded, and held it out as she walked toward me. "You forgot this in the garden yesterday," she said. I took it from her hand, the fabric soft and faintly scented of jasmine. "Thank you," I said. She nodded, eyes calm but shimmering with that same unguarded understanding from the night before. "Leaving already?" she asked. "Yeah." I paused. I wasn't sure how to say goodbye. Her lips curved in that familiar, knowing way. Some things don't need goodbyes, she said. They just stay. A breeze passed between us, lifting the edge of her shawl. For a moment, she reached out, resting her hand on my arm. A light touch, steady, deliberate. Her thumb brushed once, like a wordless reassurance. I hope you don't forget this place, she said softly, or the people in it. I met her gaze, calm, deep, and impossibly kind. I won't. She smiled then, a small, genuine smile that seemed to carry years of understanding. That's enough, she whispered. When I stepped into the car, she stepped back, her shawl fluttering lightly in the morning wind. I watched her through the window, standing by the porch, framed by the soft light, her presence both grounded and ethereal. As I drove away, I unfolded the note from the sister. It was short. You felt like peace for a while. Take care. I smiled, not with regret, but with quiet gratitude. The road stretched ahead, silent and long. The scarf lay beside me, the faint scent of jasmine still lingering. And somewhere between what could have been and what was, I realized, not every love is meant to stay. Some simply teach you how to feel again. Of course, here's the final version of Keynote 7, 500 words, with a natural call to action at the end that fits the emotional tone of the story and smoothly invites viewers to watch the full video without breaking immersion. Part 7. When they both knew, expanded with call to action. The morning I was leaving, the sky was overcast, the kind of gray that feels heavy with unspoken goodbyes. The garden shimmered with dew, and the air smelled faintly of wet leaves and tea. I stood by the car, suitcase in hand, pretending to check my phone though my thoughts were far from any screen. Inside, the house was stirring awake. My best friend called out something about visiting again soon. His voice carried the same warmth as always, but it felt distant, like a familiar song fading behind new noise. His sister appeared first. She was still in her night clothes, a light sweater draped over her shoulders. She looked sleepy, gentle, the same soft energy she'd carried from the first day. I didn't know you were leaving this early, she said, stepping closer. I have a long drive, I replied, smiling faintly. She nodded, hesitated, then reached into her pocket. I wrote this last night, she said, holding out a folded note. Don't open it now. Read it when you stop for a break. Her fingers brushed mine as I took it. Warm, fleeting, like everything about her. Thank you, I said quietly. For what? For reminding me what kindness sounds like. She smiled at that, though I could see a flicker of sadness in her eyes, the kind that comes when you realize something meaningful won't have another chapter. She turned and walked back toward the house, her hair catching the morning light one last time. And then, from the side porch, the aunt appeared. She carried a small scarf, neatly folded, and held it out as she walked toward me. You forgot this in the garden yesterday, she said. I took it from her hand, the fabric soft and faintly scented of jasmine. Thank you, I said. She nodded, eyes calm but shimmering with that same unguarded understanding from the night before. Leaving already? She asked. Yeah. I paused. I wasn't sure how to say goodbye. Her lips curved in that familiar, knowing way. Some things don't need goodbyes, she said. They just stay. A breeze passed between us, lifting the edge of her shawl. For a moment, she reached out, resting her hand on my arm. A light touch, steady, deliberate. Her thumb brushed once, like a wordless reassurance. I hope you don't forget this place, she said softly, or the people in it. I met her gaze, calm, deep, and impossibly kind. I won't. She smiled then, a small, genuine smile that seemed to carry years of understanding. That's enough, she whispered. When I stepped into the car, she stepped back, her shawl fluttering lightly in the morning wind. I watched her through the window, standing by the porch, framed by the soft light, her presence both grounded and ethereal. As I drove away, I unfolded the note from the sister. It was short. You felt like peace for a while. Take care. I smiled, not with regret, but with quiet gratitude. The road stretched ahead, silent and long. The scarf lay beside me, the faint scent of jasmine still lingering. And somewhere between what could have been and what was, I realized, not every love is meant to stay. Some simply teach you how to feel again. If you want to know what truly happened that night, when everything changed between us, watch the full story. Links in the description.